Welcome to my podcast, Today's Dream, Tomorrow's Reality. My name is Vicki Poole, and I'm a master transformational coach specializing in habit change. And this podcast is sponsored by the Enlightened Peach. And this podcast is all about embracing our mosaic life. And some of you may ask, what is a mosaic life? Well, it is recognizing that all the pieces of our life, the good, the bad, the indifferent, have all come together to make us who we are. Change any one thing and we are different. With that in mind, I invite you to embrace your perceived imperfections and celebrate who you are. This podcast is unedited and raw, just like life. And I'm your host. And today I have a special guest with me, and I will be sharing her info in just a moment. But if you have any ahas or questions, please leave a comment or a voice message. And remember to like, subscribe, and share. So now let's get started. All right. So this beautiful woman right here is Shannon Bretecher.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my goodness. I've slayed it already. All right. So we met in another group, and we neither one of us can remember why we reached out to one another, but I think there are no accidents. So she is definitely the person that we need to be talking to today. She is a certified life coach. She is the parent of 2 children, and one has special needs. She is on Instagram and TikTok, and so I'll be sharing all her info in the comments later. But Shannon, just go ahead and just tell a little bit about what you're doing with your life coaching and what your focus is now, and then we'll just go from there. How about that?
Yeah, sure. So again, Vicki mentioned that she'll put my tags in there, but my title kind of is the connection coach. And so what I really focus on is finding deeper and more meaningful connection. And I am a very strong believer through my own experiences, through what I've kind of observed and witnessed working with other people, is that to have the most meaningful connections outside of yourself, you really need to start with a connection that's an inner, like deep self-awareness within your own self, so that it feeds those other connections. And so yeah, that's kind of where I started from. And then I kind of mentioned to you a little bit earlier that I'm looking at possibly branching out a little bit more. So
Yeah. Well, the connection thing is amazing, but I will say a lot of people struggle, and I'm sure you find this too, with connecting with themselves, because it can be kind of scary sometimes, to see your shadow, to see the things you don't like about yourself, and face it and create something different. So is that primarily what you're helping them do, is connect with that inner stuff that they're afraid to look at?
absolutely. And I find such a big piece of it too is just people don't know themselves very well. And I find that's both, it has to do with your childhood wounds, but it has to do with the society that we live in as well, and kind of the outside pressures and expectations, has to do with your family wounds as well. So your mother wound or your father wound really come into play for that. And so even just knowing what your own core values are as a person, what your own boundaries are, like people have such a hard time identifying those, and then even more so respecting them for themselves, which then means
Yes.
how does anybody else respect those about you?
Right. Well, I know a lot of people feel like if I hold to this boundary, then they're not going to love me anymore. And, so boundaries are a really big deal, because it's almost that, wanting to fit in kind of thing, wanting love. And for some reason, we've been inundated with things from society that say that you can't hold your boundaries and still have connections and love from others. And so it's a really hard thing for people to do.
Absolutely. And so many people take a boundary very personally as well. Again, because of how, we've kind of looked at the way society has gone, or your own upbringing. But a boundary is not about pushing people away, right? It's about how the person can stay in your life and stay connected to you in a way that feels safe to the individual.
Yeah, yeah, that's it's interesting because one of the things in one of the workshops that I created, and this has been a while back, one of the things that we talked about was boundaries. And even people that thought they had strong boundaries didn't have strong boundaries. And that's one of the things that me personally that I have a little bit of a hard time with sometimes is for, I'm a people pleaser kind of person. And when you're in that place, a lot of times it's, well, I can go ahead and do that because they really need me right now, or they need this, or they need that. And we stop looking at what we need and we just start focusing on everybody else. Do you find that that's what's going on with a lot of the people that you work with?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, so I can completely resonate with that too, Vicky, where throughout my whole life, I have been a people pleaser, and everybody's, their emotions come before mine, their expectations come before mine, their needs come before mine. And you get to a point where it's like, well, I've just completely abandoned all these major pieces of myself. So how do I expect anybody else again to kind of respect it or meet me where I need to be met or meet my needs? And so yeah, that's what a lot of people struggle with, where they get so scared that their boundary is going to push somebody away that they themselves don't even uphold their boundaries. And it is really unfortunate because again, you see so many people just struggle through relationships and connections, and whether those are relationships with family members or with intimate partners, like it really impacts so many areas, even with coworkers, like it's everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. And I find that I have clients, or I have in the past, that the coworker thing was where they struggled them. They could have the boundaries at home, they could have the boundaries, everywhere else. But when it got to work, it was like it almost they had this idea that what everybody needed from them at work was more important than anything. And
Right.
that's where they struggled, like working late without getting paid and all kinds of things. So I was really blown away when I found that out. And so let me ask you a question. So when you're working with people with connection and the boundaries and different things, so what if they're struggling, like if they're in this workspace and they feel like they can hold their boundaries everywhere but there, what is some kind of advice that you can give someone that might be listening or watching that might help them to kind of get on that the idea of having the boundaries at work, and what can that look like?
Yeah, so sometimes the first thing I find with people having difficulty establishing boundaries, and again, if you're looking at the workplace specifically, it's kind of about the limiting beliefs that they carry.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's often a limiting belief that's like, well, if I have a boundary at work, I might get fired. Or you know what I mean? Like they
Mm-hmm.
think they're replaceable, they're not as worthy. And so for me, that's something that I start with looking is, okay, what beliefs do you have about this if you uphold your boundary? And again, often it's I'll get fired, or I will never get promoted, or I'll be viewed as like not a team player, or things like that. And again, often you start to go deeper with, okay, where does that limiting belief actually come from? Did somebody through your workspace actually indicate this to you? Often the answer is no. And it usually goes back to childhood, right? So for some reason, somewhere along the life path of childhood, a limiting belief of I have to work hard and I have to do this and I just have to follow like all the rules and not question anything and be kind of a good little soldier.
Mm-hmm.
And again, so that's a big one I find. It's just that limiting belief piece. And then following that, I mean, it comes with confidence too, right? Then you have to look at somebody's confidence in who they are. And so again, this is where that interconnection comes in again,
Right.
because it's like, who are you as a person? What do you value as a person? What is important to you? And sometimes it's like, well, maybe you're just not in the right workspace. Maybe you
Yeah.
need to change your job. And that's
Yeah.
a reality too, right?
Yeah, definitely. And so one of the things that I've noticed too is that if you watch any television, the successful people are the ones that are at the office when everybody else is already gone. They're the ones that it's like they have their phone attached to them and they will go to the job at any moment. So we're kind of brainwashed in some ways to think that that is what you do to be successful. And so people kind of just adopt that as a belief in themselves, especially if they've had something that happened in their past that might have alluded to that. Maybe they had a parent that was that way, but there are so many things that we are shown on TV and different things like that that are so far from the truth, but people adopt them very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where that creates those limiting beliefs for yourself, because again, society just has a way of making you believe there's this one path, this one way of life. And that goes through the education system, it goes through the work system, it goes through so many different systems, right? And so to your point, we're almost brainwashed to just have these beliefs that really do limit what we're capable of, limit our confidence, limit our well-being overall. And a lot of times people don't even see that.
Yeah. Don't even get me started on the machine of the education system and how it's just
I'm the same way, so maybe we should have a conversation about that.
Meant to roll out just worker bees, and there's a reason why being an entrepreneur is not the first thing that people go to, but I want to make sure I touch on things, because in your bio, you said you're the mom of a non-bio child and a special needs child. So does that mean you adopted a child?
So my 14-year-old, I've been raising them since they were about 4.5 years old.
Okay.
Bio mom just couldn't really be in the picture. In and out of the picture sometimes, but overall wasn't able to be in my oldest child's life. So yeah, so I've been mom for the last 10 years, and we have a great bond. And again, so another piece of connection, right, where you have people who are blended families or have stepchildren and things like that. And so I've experience in that area as well.
Yeah. So do you find that those kind of people that need that are the ones that gravitate to you the most?
I've had some family stuff, and again, I kind of mentioned that I'm trying to segue a little bit, because I would definitely like to take a little more of an avenue working with families and parent-children relationships. So
yeah. So your special needs child, is it autism, or what is the special need, if you don't mind my asking?
No, I don't mind. It's a bit of a complicated disorder. It's a rare disorder as well. So it's called optic nerve hypoplasia, septo-optic dysplasia. And
that's a mouthful.
yeah, essentially, it has to do with the developmental period where the optic nerves are being developed in utero. And so her optic nerves are present, and there's such a spectrum of this disorder as well. So some kids don't have any optic nerves developed at all, some have one side more developed. And anyways, in my daughter's case, they're present, but they're very underdeveloped, so they're very, very small. And because that development is all happening within the head, the brain, it can impact other parts of the brain as well. So there can be like different sections of the brain missing for some kids, and so on. For my daughter, her pituitary gland is actually offset as well, and so that can cause issues with her hormones at any point throughout her life. Currently, so she's considered legally blind, and she's growth hormone deficient. So she receives growth hormone treatment therapy weekly. And
so does that mean she's smaller than she should be at her age?
Yeah, so she was very tiny at birth anyway. She was 5 pounds. But I'm petite structure as well, so doctors weren't too concerned. And then it was about 3 months old when she was diagnosed with optic nerve hypoplasia. And then she did her stim testing for her hormones. Everything was normal. And so about 2.5 years old, that's when they started to see her growth was kind of plateauing.
Okay.
And so that's where it was like, okay, we need to get her on growth hormone now because she's not producing enough of it herself. So yeah, she was a lot smaller than most of her peers, and now she's honestly like she's been on it again since she was 2.5, and she's going to be 8 in February, and she's pretty much like on par with her peers. So
Okay. So if she's doing the growth hormones, does that affect her other hormones as well? So that she might have, um, moodiness. I know some hormones can affect like facial hair, which she's too young for that now, but is that some of the things that would possibly be going on?
yeah, so it's a possibility. They haven't seen it occur regularly, I guess I would say. It's not consistent, I guess. It's an individual basis, but it can have like cause the onset of puberty to start a little bit sooner. We have zero like signs of any of that, so I'm not too concerned at this
And how
point.
old did you say she is?
She's going to be 8 in
8.
February.
Okay. Well, just FYI, even without hormones and all that stuff, I started my period when I was 9. So did my daughter, so did my sister. So, and I often wonder when somebody's, like 12 or 14, I'm thinking, what? Of course, when I was 9, to be honest with you, I thought my mom had taken us to some classes to know what's supposed to happen and all this stuff. Well, they kept talking about it in this class about when you become a woman and all this stuff, right? So I was 9 years old, started my period. I thought I was a woman now. I didn't look at it as anything bad or anything like that. I was just so excited that this had happened because I'm a woman now. So I thought all these other children were still children. Isn't it funny how we see things as kids?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's just it. I mean, my 11-year-old started at it, or sorry, my 14-year-old started at 11. So she's gonna be 8 soon, and it's not that far off. So I'm not too concerned that the onset will happen early, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I want to go back to when she was born, and how soon did you realize that she couldn't see? Because I mean, with the little ones, they're looking around all the time, and you always think that they can see what you're doing and that you're moving, and they sometimes are moving for sound and not vision. So how long did it take for you to notice, or did the doctors notice it first?
So I noticed it. I also have a background in special care counseling.
Okay.
So um, I
Perfect
do have,
mom for this.
yeah, a little bit. kind of was set up for this.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so she was again just about 3 months, and that's still fairly young. But I was like watching her on one of her little play mats one day, like on her back, and she has the dangly things, and I was just kind of watching her, and I was specifically watching her eyes because I felt like there should have been some sort of eye contact or looking towards me, like I'm mom. Babies are always like entranced by mom, um and there really was none of that. And I had said it a couple of times to my husband, and um we were kind of like, well, we don't know, she's still so young, it's hard to tell. And so I was like, I'll bring it up at her next pediatrician appointment. And so I did. And the pediatrician there at the time was like, no, there's nothing wrong. She's just like, she was tiny at development, and so it might take a little bit longer for her eyes to better develop and her eyesight to better develop, but there's no concern. And I guess just you call that mom's intuition or mom's gut. And I didn't like that answer, but I took it for what it was at the time. And then another kind of backstory, our whole city was evacuated due to a wildfire. And so during the time that we were evacuated, we were in another city for 3 months, and I was like, wow, I need to keep her up with her pediatrician appointments and stuff. And so I got a new pediatrician while we were in a new city. And right away I mentioned, like, I was like, I really find she's not tracking, she's not even looking towards me. Like there was really nothing. And so right off, he took a look at her eyes and stuff and her size, and he was like on the ball. He was like, I think I know what this is. And he's like, and if it is, we need to make sure that her hormones are all in place, because so like when you think of cortisol can stop functioning for her at any time, and that can lead to very, very serious implications, and including death, right? And so he's like, we need to get her tested right away, get her hormones checked.
Well, thank God
And
for
so
wildfires, right?
a little bit. Yeah, and he was great. Where again, this is a rare disorder, so I really don't expect many pediatricians do know about it or really pay attention to it. And he picked it up right away, sent us to an ophthalmologist. She did the eye exams and stuff, and right off she could see that the optic nerves were underdeveloped. And so then from there it was the stim test at the hospital, which again at that age everything was fine, so that was lucky. um yeah, so that was kind of how she was diagnosed.
Okay. So how did you handle that? That's a pretty, because we all want to have healthy babies that can see and hear and speak and grow. And so it's got to be pretty devastating to see that this, because no matter what the problem is, it's going to be a bit of a challenge as they're growing up and maybe throughout their entire lives. So how did you handle something like that?
So when she was first diagnosed, it was really difficult, really heavy for me, my husband. There was a lot of moments where, again, because we had our older child and we'd seen all the kids' steps, learning to ride their bike, learning to tie their shoes, and all this, and all I could think about was, well, she's never going to do that. I'm never going to sit down at the kitchen table and be able to color with her. I'm never going to be able to teach her how to ride a bike. I'm never going to be able, like, you just go through all these things that it's like, oh, everything's going to be so different. She's not going to have the childhood that you thought she would or that you wish she would.
Yeah.
So that lasted for a while. And then the other part was, like, I joined some Facebook groups or Facebook support groups for specifically ONH and septo-optic dysplasia.
So there's enough of it
And
that there's a Facebook group?
they're seeing more and more
Wow.
cases.
I
And there's
wonder
no
why. Do they
right
know?
now. So, no, they've done genetic testing. They've done, like, they used to, like, back when they started seeing an increase in cases, they used to think it had to do with a young um maternal age, so mothers conceiving at a young age, but this has now been completely debunked. Like, it's across the board. You can have women in their 20s having children with ONH, or you could have women in their 30s, 40s having kids with ONH. Like, so they really don't know what the cause is.
Yeah.
There's more of a speculation it's environmental, but what exactly, they still don't know. But yeah, so I joined these Facebook groups, and both, like, it is supportive and it is good to have a community around it, but then it's also really intimidating and scary because you see so many people posting about their children's cases. And
Right.
like I said, there's such a spectrum for this. Like, there's some kids who are nonverbal, there are some kids who have like no mobility, so you see it all, and then it's almost overwhelming, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
gosh, like, what is she actually going to be capable of? And again, with my background, a little less daunting, because I start to apply my education and my own experiences with other people's children. And it's like, no, we just gotta do what we need to do to keep her progressing, keep her going. And I would say probably around 6 months, like, we had returned back home and got all the resources in place and stuff. And I had stopped kind of worrying in that sense, because it was like, no, she's going to be capable of what she's going to be capable of, and nobody knows what that is until we get to those points, right?
Right. So how did you use your expertise and help her to progress? So I'm assuming that when you're talking about helping people with this kind of thing, that there must be some kind of protocol or something that you've developed that helps people to not only deal with all this emotional stuff that goes on within the parent, because you mentioned connecting with the child and I guess working with them in a different way so that they can be as much as they can. Am I right in that?
Yeah,
Okay.
so a big thing is just combating expectations, and again, a lot of those societal expectations, and then this is where education system
Mm-hmm.
comes into play all over again. And it's really, for me, a big piece, and this is again where I would like to um, help parents more as well, is the advocacy piece,
Mm-hmm.
because it's so hard to know what you need to advocate for, how to advocate, and what you actually
Yeah.
have access to, right?
Right.
And so, because I have a background and I've learned about so many resources, different types of therapy for, XYZ disorders or disabilities, I'm very aware of those things. And so, as soon as like we got back home, it was like, no, we're getting her into physio, we're getting her into OT, we're getting her into speech and language, we're getting her into early intervention. Like, there was all these resources through the hospital and otherwise private, but again, so many parents don't really know how to ask for those
Yeah,
or
I
even learn,
wouldn't know.
right?
If I had gotten some kind of diagnosis like that, I was like, it's like, now what do I do? And if your pediatrician is not versed on what all this means and what to do, then you're just kind of like sitting out there with no idea, right?
Exactly. And then never even mind, like when she did start school, going into the school system, I was like, I know I need to really demand and ask for what she needs, because nobody's prepared for this disorder for her. Like, I think the stats on how many teachers actually encounter a visually impaired or blind child are so low, and then never mind, because of her disorder, it causes other issues and developmental delay and stuff. So um it was really a godsend that we had with the school, because she had a fabulous principal, fabulous teachers, and educational assistants all throughout her school life so far. But yeah, they were all like really willing to meet me where I needed them to meet us for
Mm-hmm.
her to be successful in school. And like, I wanted her in an integrated classroom. I didn't want her
I was going to ask
separated
about
from
that
the
because
kids.
it's I think a lot of times when they put the children into a classroom that is just children just like them, then they never learn how to blossom in the real world.
And there's so much more benefit too, even just for the other kids to be around children with
Yeah.
special needs, right? Because then they learn how to interact with them differently. They learn more about, okay, somebody's a little bit different than you, but that really doesn't change anything. You can still interact with them, you can still play with them. And again, we saw so much of that for Chloe, which was such a blessing, that so many kids were just very, very intrigued by her, but like just so much love came from them. Like, they absolutely loved having Chloe in the classroom. And yeah, again, that was just such a big piece for us, that I was like, no, I don't want her to be segregated. Yes, she didn't do all the academic things that the other kids were doing, but she was just included in the classroom. So again, just that social aspect was so important.
Yeah. Yeah. So how does she like school?
She loves school, which again, as a parent with a child with special needs, that is like such a blessing as well, because it's one thing to have your regular daily struggles with the child, um but then to have a child who hates going to school and you have to force them, like, that would be so much harder, I find. And definitely there are parents who deal with that as well.
Well, I
But
had I had to deal with that with a child of mine that there was not a damn thing wrong with him. He just hated school, and it was like, oh my God, it was like a torturous thing every single day, making him do his homework, forcing him out of the bed, forcing him dressed, and getting him to school. And it was like I couldn't imagine that with also a special needs child too, because it was pretty intense with a child that he just didn't want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, a child with special needs, chances are there's a comprehension piece too, where they don't even understand why they would have to go to school and they're being forced to do this. And
Yeah.
again, I can imagine that parents who deal with both sides of those, it's really, really tough, and such an internal struggle as a parent too, right? But no, she loves school, and we are very, very grateful for that. And um, yeah.
So how does she navigate home without being able to see? And I know I'm probably asking questions that don't make a don't mean anything, but it's like I'm just always curious. I'm because well, let me just back up. It's totally different, but it's a little bit the same as I have always been fascinated with sign language. And so for a long time, I was going to sign language classes, and I even joined some meetups that were for sign language. And and I would get there and you couldn't tell who couldn't hear because everybody was signing. It took a while to figure out who could hear and who couldn't. And it was just fascinating. And I even started meeting with one of the non-hearing people and having them teach me sign language, which was really difficult, or it was for me. But and I know some of their stories about how they dealt with things when they were little. And so I'm just curious, how and I guess if you've never been able to see, it's like it's just what you do. But maybe how has it, because you've had the other one and you can see the difference, how has it been that she's had to develop all of these different skills that maybe your other one doesn't have?
So she's pretty fascinating. Like, despite her lack of vision, despite her comprehension delays and things like that, her language delays, she has really adapted to just figuring her stuff out. And again, it's just been so fascinating to see. Like, she skipped crawling, she went right to walking, because for her, the motivation of being on her belly and lifting her head, most babies do that so that they can see what's around them.
Right.
She obviously didn't care about seeing what was around her because she couldn't.
I
So
hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
yeah, she had no interest in crawling or anything like that. And so she went straight to standing and walking, and she was very, very wee at the time. Um, but it was like
How
she
old
just
was she?
I would say she was trying to think now, 1.5 when she started like really standing and holding her weight. And then she was about 2 when she started walking. But she was tiny, right? Like, again, she was such a tiny little baby. And um we have some pictures of her where it's just like she's standing and holding my husband's hands, and she's just like, she looks like she's this big compared to him, like she's so small. But yeah, so she started walking, and it was like once she was walking and on her feet, there's no stopping her. And so for us, I knew it became really important to label things throughout the house, like everywhere. So the coffee table is here, the couch is here, the counter is here, and kind of taking her around, just feeling stuff. And like, she learned the layout of the house so quickly. And because at first, some of her specialists or intervention workers wanted her to use some sort of either a cane, or they actually have like little kind of trolley ones too, so that she wouldn't like trip on things or run into things. And I was like, she really doesn't need it. Like, she has learned the layout of the house so well. And like, she knew where the stairs were, she started doing the stairs, and that was terrifying for me.
I bet.
Yeah, and so she's just been really, really good about that. And then same thing at the school, like, she does use her cane at the school, but once she's like gotten the layout of stuff, she'll use the school because there's other students in the hall and stuff, so avoid tripping and this and that. But she knows like where to go to the office, knows where to go to the gym. um yeah,
Well, I
it's
know you're
very
in Canada, so I don't know if it's the same as here. Like here, I know that they have like an AEP. So, and I don't really even know what that stands for. But I know that when there's a child that has something special that they need help with, that they may have an advocate that helps them get from one classroom to the next. And they even make allowances for if they have a physical disability, that it may take them longer to get from this destination to this destination. And so I know I had somebody that had a young child that their IEP was that they had a hard time with tests and things. So they would have a special person that would verbally give them the test and things like that. So is that some of the things that you're talking about when you're talking about the stuff at the school for your daughter?
Yeah, so in Canada here we have educational assistants, or we have teacher assistants, and an educational assistant is generally very specific to a child with a disability, and they generally work one-on-one with the child. So some kids will have an EA that might be a split EA, so kind of working between two kids in the classroom or so on. Chloe, again, just with her disability, with her comprehension stuff, she has a one-on-one
Okay,
EA.
very
There
cool.
is somebody with her all the time. And for me, that was just such a necessity because it's a safety concern. Like if she's out on the playground, for example, and a stranger made their way over and took her by the hand and said, Chloe, come with me, she would leave with them, right? Like there's just such a safety issue there. She could wander off and get close to a street, and you know what I mean? Like, so for me, it was very important that I was like, no, she needs to have somebody one-on-one with her because there's too much risk if she doesn't. As she's getting older too, you know, we have to start considering bullying and things like that, where if a kid brought something to her and was like, here, Chloe, eat this, she probably would put it in her mouth, not knowing what, or, you know, the intention is even. So again, for me, it's always been and that was something we actually struggled with because we switched schools this year, we moved. And the school was not prepared in having a one-on-one EA for her. And so that did not go over well. And
so how do you handle that?
So I always ask for a meeting prior to the school year. And so I requested this meeting. The pretty much the whole team was there. There was the vice principal, the classroom support was there, and then there was two people from district, which isn't usually typical, but I'm glad that they were there that day. Anyways, and so I kind of asked if, I'm like, do we know who her EA is? Because I like to know ahead of time to start preparing her, like what her EA's name is going to be, and like we're going to school to see Miss so and so. And anyways, and they kind of looked at me and they're like, oh, she's not going to have a full-time EA. And I was just like, excuse me, what do you mean? And they tried to spin it as, well, we really like to foster independence and really assess where kids are at and what their needs actually are and this and that. And I was just like, no, I'm like, you don't understand Chloe's diagnosis then. And I come very prepared. So I had her passed. We have IPPs instead of like report cards for children with special needs. They're individual plans. And so I brought her past IPPs. I had brought even a letter that I had asked her EA from the other school that she had been at for a number of years to write up what Chloe's day-to-day is kind of like and what she does to support Chloe. And so I had that on file as well. And I was like, you guys need to read this because you don't understand what her needs are and what the risks are. And anyway, so they kind of skimmed through briefly and they're like, okay, can we make photocopies of this? And anyways, they went and did that. And then there two people at district, they were like, well, we need to get funding to have a full-time EA. And I was like, yep, then you need to get funding because I'm not sending my child to school where, again, she's at XYZ risks. And anyways, once they kind of heard everything I had to say and explain about her needs and her disorder, they saw the paperwork, they kind of were kicking themselves going, yeah, we didn't expect this. And we really didn't realize that, you know, she had such high needs. And anyway, so it took about 2 weeks for them to get the funding, get an EA hired full time, and it all worked out well. And again, she's still loving school. Everything's working out good. So, but yeah, it was just
Yeah.
so that this is where I think of though, where parents who
Yeah.
don't have that confidence to advocate for themselves. They want to trust everybody who is the specialist or the professional,
Hmm.
and some like a parent.
Especially if they start saying, well, we want to foster independence, and because we all want that for our kids, right? That would be, so I think maybe they didn't have any ill intent, but they're going to say what they need to say to make everything they're doing seem right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so and that's what I kind of left that going, if I wasn't the parent that I was, again, with my education background, with my experience background, I very well could have been a parent sitting there being like, okay, like I'll trust what you guys are gonna do. And again, that just puts my child at some serious risks. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I walked away with from that with this idea of like, no, parents need to know how to better support themselves through these kinds of things.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I can see where that would be needed in a lot of areas, not just in what your daughter has. So if there's a parent that has a special needs child that may not be the same as what your daughter has, can you help them with that too? Because I would assume that the actions of supporting would be the same regardless of what the problem is, correct?
Yeah, and so such a big thing for me is your child might have medical specialists and doctors, um, outside resources and professionals, and they're all, again, the expert or the professional of what they do. But your child is such an individual human being, despite their diagnosis that is the same as other diagnoses. Your child still has their individual characteristics, their individual personality, and the only expert on your child is you.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh, this kind of gives me chills to think that, without you being there to help them, there's a lot of kids that are going to kind of fall through the cracks and and be end up thrown into one of those special classes just because it's easier to do than offer them this help out here.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm so glad that you have kind of moved your expertise just a little bit to help with that, because that's just mind blowing to think of how easily we can be manipulated in a way to do things that maybe aren't the best for our child and ourselves, because it affects the entire family when they don't get the right help when they're at school, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you do, there's a responsibility as a parent where you do need to understand your child's diagnosis. You do need to understand their needs. And again, sometimes parents are so overwhelmed with the behaviors and the things going on with their child that they really don't take the time to do that. And so again, it can just become this vicious cycle of, you know, the child's really not getting all the benefits that they deserve to be getting. The parents are struggling because of this. Like, it can just be snowball into like such a bigger issue. And so yeah, for me, it's like, no, this really hits home, and I can relate to this. And um there is a need there, just like you said, there's such a need for that kind of support. So
Yeah, and with your life coaching, you can kind of help the parents with dealing with all the stuff that's coming up for them as they're trying to advocate for their child.
absolutely, that's the hope. So
Yeah, well, it sounds like it's a perfect plan to me. I mean, because if I had a special needs child, I would be calling you for damn sure, because it's one thing to think you know what to do, or be totally lost, but to have somebody, a specialist in that arena, to be there, it's a like a game changer. I mean, I even find, I don't have a special needs child, but I even find in business, if I'm left to my own devices, it's like, I don't know how to make this work, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that, and it's easy to give up. um, but if you hire a coach that's a specialist in business, which I've done, and they give me a thing that do this today and this today, and this is what we need to look at, and that's what we need to look at, then I have a game plan that I can move forward and do what I need to do. So it's the same with this, is that you have an expert that knows what's going on, and they can actually give you like, these are the things we need to have in place, and let me help you with this. And I know it's hard, but let me help you with that too. And so it's like, I just, the implications of the breath of fresh air that it would be for to know you got somebody that knows what's going on and you don't feel so friggin' lost. It would just be amazing. So like I said, I'm in awe, because that's a big task to undertake, and to have been able to be there for your daughter and the way that you have, and then to see how it's important to be able to help other people that way, because I will be honest, and maybe it comes from your life coach already, but a lot of people, their first thought is not, well, this is something other people need,
Mhm.
they would just think, well, I'm so glad I knew how to do that. They don't, and you have that that fortitude inside to want to help other people with that. So that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it can be so from my own experience and journey with having a typically developing child and then having a special needs child, it can be really lonely because you feel like you don't have other parents who understand you, you don't have other parents who can actually relate to your experiences. And so even just that isolation, and again, this now ties into the connection piece of what I do, right? So even just that isolation of being a parent with a child with special needs, like that in itself is really, really a deep struggle that people have. And it, again, just impacts how confident you start to become in dealing with your child's disability or disorder. And again, just so many dots get connected very easily with that. And yeah, my hope is to kind of build a little more of a support system and a little more of a community. So
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'm so glad we got on here today so you could share this with everybody. And so I'm going to be putting your links and everything in the comments, but for those that may be listening now, how can they reach out to you? And then I will put the supporting information in the comments.
yeah, so best way is probably through Instagram right now. I do have a Facebook page as well. So I mean, if you're only on Facebook page, you can find me there, the Connection Coach. And Instagram, it's the Connection Coach.slb, I believe. So you can find me there and send messages through Instagram.
All right. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much again, Shannon, for being here. It's definitely a blessing to connect with you, and there's the connection thing in in another way and a little bit more in depth, I guess. And so I definitely appreciate you, and I just love what you're about and what you're doing to help these parents that I'm sure they're when they hear this, it's going to feel like they've met their savior in a way, somebody that can really be there for them. So thank you again for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today too, Vicky. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. So one of the ways I love to end my podcast is with this statement. The best way to predict the future is create it. So what are you creating? Mwah.